Hello and welcome to Reading Architecture Writing, a lecture series at Kyoto University in which architects and other scholars introduce books they've recently published or are soon to publish on topics, usually but not always, related to contemporary Japanese architecture. It's a great pleasure to introduce tonight Marcela Aragüez, who is Assistant Professor of Architecture and Associate Director of Studies in Architecture at IE University in Madrid, in Spain. She received a PhD in Architectural History and Theory at the Bartlett School of Architecture at University College London, where she also received a Master of Science in Spatial Design, for which her dissertation received the ULC Turner Prize. Marcela's research analyzes discourses and practices around the production of flexible architecture with an emphasis on cross-cultural post-war practices in Japan. She recently coordinated a joint research project titled The Culture of Water in collaboration with the Kyoto Institute of Technology and the Lucerne University of Applied Sciences. She's a licensed architect with professional experience in Spain and Switzerland, and her work and research has been acknowledged by grants and awards from institutions that include the Japan Foundation, the Sasakawa Foundation, the Cannon Foundation, and the Society of Architectural Historians of Great Britain. She's published in various international journals, and since January 2023, she's served as the general editor of Architectural Histories, which is the journal of the European Architectural History Network. So tonight, she is going to present her research on a topic that's of great interest to me, which is the World's Fair held in Osaka in 1970, known as Expo 70. And in particular, she's going to be presenting a document, the so-called Red Book, which was a collective study that conceptualized the spatial and performative scheme that will be implemented under the big roof designed by Kenzo Tange, which reveals the plaza to be an urban infrastructure generated through the collaboration of computer scientists, musicians, artists, and architects. So I know that Marcela has just come from a morning spent in the archives of the Expo Museum, and I think tonight we're going to hear a very interesting presentation. I'll pass over to Marcela.
What I'm going to present today is pretty much a work in progress. So I would really appreciate the feedback from everyone. And it's as Thomas was saying, it's about the documents about the Festival Plaza that I believe deserves further research and also dissemination. So I'm going to share my screen and start. Okay, so in 1967, 3 years before the start of the Osaka Expo 70, a group of architects, musicians, artists, and computer scientists developed an extensive investigation on the conception of the Festival Plaza, the Expo's main event space. Under the label Japan World Exposition Event Research Committee, more than 20 collaborators produced an ambitious 200-page-long report illustrating the conceptual generation of the Festival Plaza, its ideological grounds, and the technological systems to be implemented in its layout. The core stuff listed in the report was made by musician Kuniharu Akiyama, architect Arata Isazaki, engineer Nobuhiro Sato, and artist Katsuhiro Yamaguchi. A list of specialist staff illustrates the variety of disciplines and profiles involved in the research, from members associated to Uso Nishiyama like architect Atsushi Ueda, those affiliated to Tange Lab, such as computer scientists Yoshio Tsukyo and Nachio Tosu, science fiction writers Sakio Komatsu, or the members of the Jiken Kobo collective group like Yamaguchi, such as Naoji Imai, film directors like Toshio Matsumoto, and established corporate professionals like Hitachi's chief engineer of computer vision, Shohei Takada. Commonly known as Red Book because of the color of its cover, the official title of the report roughly translates as Report and Research and Investigation into General Performance Mechanisms that use water, sound, light, etc. in exterior spaces centering on the Festival Plaza of the Japan Exposition, and it was issued internally for the Expo organizers. The Red Book became the conceptual draft of the performative spaces which would ultimately be implemented under the space frame designed by Kenzo Tange, and it remains to date a fairly unknown document. Its pages are profusely illustrated with more than 70 drawings, photographs, diagrams, woodblock prints, and collages, some of them displayed in fold-out pages. In this talk, I will provide a brief overview of the content of the Red Book, and I will highlight some key aims of its investigations, which I claim were rather overlooked or dismissed when the plaza was materialized. In doing so, I will point out at specific references showing the wide scope of knowledge embedded in the generation of the plaza. I will then go on to address how the pages of the Red Book challenge the alleged almost exclusive authorship of Arate Sasaki on the conception of the plaza, while simultaneously acknowledging his crucial role as mediator of a varied array of disciplines. My point here is that the Red Book provides both a piece of research in its own right and an alternative account of the Festival Plaza, one that moves away from more common discussions as the Expo being the swan song of a recent past, and rather emphasizes the role of its supporting characters. After the list of contents and contributors shown earlier, the summary page highlights the main objectives of the book: to manage and control the variety of events set to take place at the Festival Plaza by means of a centralized computer system. These events would be featuring devices producing lights, sound, water, and smoke effects. The idea behind the Festival Plaza was to become an invisible monument, a phrase written in English in the original document and repeated throughout the book. One of the main challenges was, as explained in the summary, to integrate such varied array of devices within the logic of the plaza's layout, which should be able to incorporate them according to the different needs of the many events to be planned in the space. This brief summary is followed by 2 fold-out pages showing the scheme of the Festival Plaza from the same viewpoint. First one is the photograph of a physical model of the plaza. The second one, an axonometric drawing depicting some connections between the plaza and its context. After this introduction, the book content is organized around 4 sections: events, mechanism, system, and process. The sections, of which event was by far the longest, do not coincide with the categories under which the core staff of the research project were labeled. This already denotes an inherent transdisciplinarity strategy in the project, where no clear boundaries between research categories were apparently set up. The events section starts with a summary of the master plan ideated by Uso Nishiyama and Kenzo Tange for the Expo. It showcases the delineation of the so-called symbol zone, the central area of the plan where the Festival Plaza would be located, and also provides a sense of the scale of the whole area by comparing the plan with that of well-known places, such as Tange's Yoyogi Gymnasium and Bernini's San Pietro Square. The section is followed by an explanation of the basic conceptual strategy they laid out for the Festival Plaza to produce a space where, we read, daily life is put on hold. A historical analysis of traditional street festivals in Japan is followed by an environmentalist account, as we read, of the idea of a plaza as an urban typology that has drastically mutated in Western Europe, from being a space dedicated to religion and politics in ancient times to the disappearing of its collective function. With this premise, the Festival Plaza is presented as an opportunity to combine the spirit of Japanese traditional festivals with the spatial typology of a Western urban plaza. The report emphasizes the aim of enhancing audience participation in planned events, retrieving the sense of community gathering underlying traditional festivals within a rather foreign urban typology, the plaza, that is conceived to operate as a collective space for interaction. To that end, the book features a quantitative and qualitative analysis of the interrelationships between territories, events, buildings, and crowds taking place in some of the main festivals around the country. For instance, the study showcases a series of diagrams in which movement flows are almost literally translated into the spatial configuration of the Festival Plaza. For instance, the study maps the reach, density, and movement directions of dancers in the Awa Odori Festival in Tokushima Prefecture, the largest dance festival in the country, to then apply such directions and movements into the plaza's layout. After this study, the Festival Plaza is defined by 3 main aspirations. It will accommodate a human scale, even in the midst of a large-scale event. The space for the festival will vanish by the end of the festival itself, and the construction of the space should be deliberately designed to fuse audience and performers. The discussion also focuses on envisioning events as environments where people will mingle and relate without an apparent order, and the role which contemporary art may have in achieving this goal. Attention is given, among other things, to the work being developed by the Experiments in Art and Technology Collective Group, who also took part in the expo, the production of happenings, exemplified by Toru Takemitsu's theater play Blue Aurora for Toshi Ishiyanagi of 1964, inflatable installations such as Steve Paxton's Physical Things, as we see here, or The Art of Light, as in the work of Nicolas Schoeffer, Krise, and Dan Flavin. The section ends by emphasizing the aim of producing a central core for the expo that enhances participation and the blurring of roles between audience and performers, as well as the inclusion of events and actions aligned with contemporary art trends. All this to be achieved by implementing a control mechanism. The devices that will facilitate such interactions, as well as communications between the changing parties taking part in the Festival Plaza, is explained in the mechanism section. Here, the term production of a play, ensutsu, is adopted synonymously to that of control, suggesting that in order to provide the promised interaction, a careful management of all parties involved had to be planned. The main facilitator of this control would be the so-called artificial brain, a central computer system that would manage changes in the mechanical devices of the plaza in response to the events and flows of people taking part around them. The computerized system was not supposed to be in full control of the events, but rather to provide a framework that allowed for what was called, quote, one-time nature events, end of quote, where details cannot be defined by a controlling system. The text goes even further and proposes that the system should be self-learning throughout the duration of the expo, a rather ambitious idea given the technology available at the time. For the design of movable elements in the plaza, authors draw upon references of alternative theater spaces, such as Jacques Polieri's Total Movement Theater, the system of movable seats created by Maurizio Sacripanti, and the theater designs of Alain Bourbonnet. These references are followed by a study of special effects using sound, lights, water, and fire, and they are described, researched, and translated into a series of devices that can enhance the phenomenological dimension of the events. As part of these mechanisms, the book outlines the system by which 3 robots would respond to external inputs by means of satellite computers connected to the central one. In the end, only 2 robots, the famous Deme and Deku, usually credited to Isozaki, were finally implemented. Through a series of movement-sensitive sensors, these robots were programmed to respond to the events of the Festival Plaza. The artificial brain is described in this section as the new director of this space. Outlined as a system able to process large amounts of data, its functioning is conceptually illustrated by a simple diagram interlacing the words human and machine, but how such interaction was to be achieved in specific technical terms remains unclear. The way in which the mechanisms would operate the spatial transformations of the Festival Plaza is expanded in the systems section, where a series of diagrams are presented to explain the communication settings between built elements, the time frame of each event, and the feedback system that would regulate inputs and outputs between events and mechanisms. Particular attention is provided to the sequence of events set to take place throughout the day and how the plaza would adapt its layout to accommodate them. The section draws upon examples of graphic notation, such as the poem Electronique by Edgar Varese, as well as a reference from spatiotemporal urban diagrams, like this one, analyzing the approach to the Kotohikaru Shrine in Kagawa Prefecture. Time, frequency, location, scale, and type of events are defined throughout the systems section of the Red Book with diagrams and tables. Such a meticulous method of event planning controlled by a central computer, ideated 3 years before the opening of the expo, somehow contradicts the idea that the plaza was meant to accommodate spontaneous encounters. And finally, the content of the event, mechanism, and system sections are tested in the 4th and last part of the Red Book process, where a selection of external consultants offer their feedback on the outlined plans for the Festival Plaza. Commentators range from aeronautical engineer Mamoru Hosaka to designer Shinya Izumi and more well-known figures such as artist Taro Okamoto and Minami Tada and actress Sayuri Yoshinaga. Buckminster Fuller stands out as the sole Western name among the commentators. Fuller laments in typical Fuller way, we can say, that what is being proposed for the festival is not new and resembles what he already outlined in the 1930s with one of his mentors, Danish architect Knud Lundberg Holm, for the conception of a total environmental control of space. Fuller is also the only one who refers in these comments to Isasaki's idea of an invisible city as an important underlying theory in the conception of the plaza. In general, comments in this section alluded to the outrageous ambition of the project and the need of a longer period of time to figure out how to bring such ideas into reality, especially in terms of the technological systems needed for their implementation. During the celebration of the Expo, when most interactive devices did not work as planned, it became apparent that such objections were not unfounded. So, the Red Book narrates the genesis of the Festival Plaza as an invisible monument and unfolds two different perspectives, namely the creation of controlling systems of information, which is perhaps more well-known, but also the study of vernacular festivities in their conceptual and, more importantly, in their spatial distribution that is translated into the plaza's layout. The book is indeed portrayed as a choral endeavor, with no one, not even Isesaki, singled out as head of the research project. Despite being completed in just less than a month, the report was quite detailed in its content on sound, light, water, and fire equipment to integrate plaza, the computerization of a feedback information system, and a meticulous projection of social interactions between performers and audience. The speedy assembly of such a diverse knowledge could have only been possible by counting on the past experiences that all contributing members had had during the 1950s and 60s, acknowledging the relevance of each of the listed authors. As its aims ultimately proved to be too much for the technology of the time, the Red Book reveals itself as a work of intentions rather than guidelines, and it is precisely because of such condition that we may see it as a product of its time. Isasaki's alleged leading role seems to be contested in the Red Book, although it's kind of known that he was not the exclusive author, it couldn't have been. The Red Book rather reveals the conception of these performative devices and the overall organization of the Festival Plaza as an achievement well beyond his expertise. However, while Isesaki may have had limited capacity to contribute with his specific inputs on the areas of inquiry tackled in the Red Book, he was well aware of the many aspects and disciplines incorporated in the investigation. Aside from his individual practice and ongoing collaboration with Tange, at the time, Isesaki was also connected to the experimental art scene in Japan and was simultaneously developing urban analysis and theories of his own. These multiple tasks help us portray his role as mediator of the different disciplines included in the Red Book, rather than as the author of its content. Undeniably, and as Fuller points out in his comment, the idea of the plaza becoming a dematerialized yet highly controlled and equipped environment resonates with Isasaki's Invisible City, a text written almost concurrently to the production of the Red Book. In his text, Isesaki attributes the power of generating new forms in cities to the capacity of simulation of invisible systems in urban design. The city is theorized as a self-regulating model, a constantly changing man-machine construct where both spaces and phenomena are transient. The text, first published in 1967, was included that same year in the book version of Japanese urban space, Nihon no Toshi Kukan. And I know this is the cover of the magazine version, but it's a way nicer one than the book version. So I'm just portraying it with this one. So this was an important research led by Isesaki and architectural historian Teiji Ito on the exploration of urban experience and a spatial configuration of Japanese cities. The research comprises an inventory of urban forms categorized into three types: principles of space order, methods of spatial composition, and activators of urban space. In the fashion of other contemporary urban research, such as Kevin Lynch's The Image of the City and Gordon Cullen's The Concise Townscape, Nihon no Toshi Kukan attempted to survey, analyze, and interpret relationships between urban configuration, spatial landmarks, and actual experience observed in the city. Historian Jordan Sung emphasizes the particular proclivity of the study to value everyday encounters and the anti-monumental character of the spaces in which they usually happen. He relates this form of individual and collective interaction to the notion of kaiwai, translated by Ito and Isazaki as activity space in the research. The notion of kaiwai embodies a physical space that only exists when activities take place within it. This coincides with one of the three aims of the Festival Plaza highlighted before, which was the space for the festival will vanish by the end of the festival itself, and shows that the Red Book uses ideas already explained in Nihon no Toshikukan, as well as some of its diagrams, like the one like the one on the approach to the Koto Higaru Shrine shown earlier. Parallel to the urban research alongside Ito, Isazaki was also an active member of the experimental artistic circle around the Sogetsu Art Center in Tokyo. He was involved as a set designer in, the 1966 film The Face of Another, Tanin no Kao, directed by Hiroshi Shigahara. Among other spaces, Isazaki designed a doctor's clinic, an eerie space devoid of doors and windows and arranged with a set of transparent reflective shelves that projected a changing atmosphere. That same year, in 1966, he also designed the layout for the landmark exhibition From Space to Environment, Kukan Kara Kankyo-e, conceived as a succession of events promoting interaction between art pieces and visitors, and included the work of artists such as Yamaguchi, who would later collaborate in the making of the Red Book. 2 years later, by the time Isazaki was already working for the Expo, his famous electric labyrinth for the 1968 Milan Triennale drew upon ideas previously tested for the production of interactive spaces. The design consisted of a grid of 12 undulated translucent panels that would rotate following the visitors' movements, a changing environment in which visitors were active members of the art piece itself. Electric Labyrinth became an important test for the production of interactive spaces with the use of responsive technologies, and was conceived as a total environment by Isazaki with the addition of music, folk imagery, and a collage depicting the ruins of Hiroshima after World War II. Notably, the events section of the Red Book profusely uses the trendy word environment or kankyo to define the space of the Festival Plaza as a monument in which the joy of the onari or traditional summer street festival is integrated within the plaza or hiroba by means of the use of advanced technology. The idea of monument or anti-monument, as Sand would argue, is here understood as a transient one, with no particular physical shape, a sort of activity space where interaction between built elements and the public is expected. So 3 years after the production of the Red Book, the Festival Plaza was materialized as an open urban space at the core of the symbol zone, but as anticipated, it lacked many of the technological devices described in the original research. Similarly, the idea of the plaza becoming a public space to be spontaneously appropriated by the public was also not achieved. In the end, the area was monitored and meticulously controlled by the Expo authorities. In this managed plaza, as artist and Isazaki's friend Masunobu Yoshimura would put it, interaction between events and spectators was simply not allowed. Unexpected activities were not only impossible in the plaza, but those who attempted to set up impromptu actions were blatantly repressed, and any kind of improvised activity would be dismantled by the Expo security forces. In addition, the computer system that would change the layout in response to people's movements and through the help of the 2 performing robots moving around the space never really worked as planned. Given his ambiguous position, Isazaki seems to have played a mediating role not only with respect to the various disciplines that shaped the creation of the Festival Plaza, as argued earlier, but also between 2 quite different trends. The first one, closer to the concerns of the political establishment, relates the use of computer systems with the development of surveillance control schemes of people's flows that Tange himself had been researching for the government since the early 1960s. The second one has to do with an experimental understanding of environments by visual and media artists with respect to the creation of interactive spaces. These 2 trends added to the aim of arranging the plaza as a kind of archive of urban forms and movement patterns, turned out to be too ambitious a goal to be materialized. Technological failures and controlled freedom added to the ongoing criticisms that the aims and operations of the Expo in general and of the Festival Plaza in particular had received even before its opening. In truth, the idea of creating a space for interaction clashed with the plazas being a space for institutional representation of both Japan and the countries taking part in the Expo. The event's schedule of the plaza did not leave much room for spontaneous use, and the designers of the Festival Plaza were primarily seen as bureaucrats, manipulating quantitative data to which human activities were added. Visual artist Tomatsu Shomei also lamented the proliferation of spectacular images and effects in the Expo's exhibition that did not convey any critical message. Genpei Akasegawa criticized the Expo as being a strategy on the part of the Japanese government to distract the attention of Japanese citizens from shady political moves, like the controversial renewal of the Anpo Treaty in 1970. The downsides of the Expo, added to global economic shifts, especially after 1973, led to discarding technologically driven responsive environments that did not deliver their promised promotion of human interaction. With no events to celebrate following its 6 months duration, soon after the end of the Expo, the entire site and the Festival Plaza with it was dismantled. But despite its ephemeral existence, ultimate controlled performance, and rather critical reception, the plaza has been interpreted as a symbolic claim for change in the urban planning of Japanese cities, one that would involve innovative morphologies while also adopting a close link with people's practices. In this sense, we can argue perhaps that the Red Book provides a much richer conceptual framework than what was represented at the Festival Plaza when it comes to city-making goals. Rooted in diverse erudition and driven by a greatly varied array of profiles, roles, disciplines, and applied knowledge, the Red Book may be read in at least 3 ways. First, it constitutes a condensed testimony of 2 opposed yet related contemporary trends in Japan, namely the pursuit of a responsive environment at an architectural scale with the help of a controlling central system, and the study and understanding of urban cultural practices that are synthesized and spatially applied. Second, its pages also gather an insightful account of the ambitious aims of the Festival Plaza and the many authors involved in its conception beyond the starring roles of Tange and Isozaki, contributing to expand on the historiography of the Expo 70 in particular, and on the architecture of the time in Japan by acknowledging the contribution of its supporting characters. The varied content of the Red Book is not signed by any author. Instead, it is portrayed as a collaboration. This was, of course, not exempted from hierarchy. Evidence suggests that Isozaki was the mediator and probably one of the most important conceptual brains of the research. However, the multidisciplinary research illustrated in the Red Book somehow portrays a greater contribution beyond its limited materialization at the Expo. This takes us to the 3rd reading of the Red Book, one that addresses its pages as a compelling research that reflects upon the plaza as an urban typology, with the Festival Plaza being only a built example. The Red Book illustrates the Festival Plaza as a project with experimental intentions, one in which aspects such as audience participation were theorized rather than explicitly adopted. The design process put together in the Red Book represents an important attempt to formulate an innovative spatial configuration based on movement patterns collected from the city to create a gathering space. The urban plaza as a type is reassessed here and conceived so as to regenerate multiple urban experiences and opportunities for interaction while simultaneously controlling its functioning. The scarce presence of plazas in Japanese cities has actually been a topic of debate ever since the 1930s, when Japanese historian Hanigoro started to point out at the lack of this kind of urban spaces in Japan in relation to the absence of a democratic culture. The term plaza was then translated as hiroba, literally meaning broad open space, and became common in the 1950s and 60s. It was used in political discourses as a way to accommodate citizenry and collective opinion into public life, although the actual physical creation of plazas remains limited. In addition, The embodiment of the commons around the existence of urban plazas is in post-war discourses largely had a double-sided reading. They were seen as spaces for interaction and exchange of multiple opinions, as much as places representing a cohesive solidarity among citizens. The Festival Plaza therefore constitutes a built testing ground on which to experience renovated spatial and social goals of the plaza typology in Japan, one that arguably embodies tensions between control and freedom. In that sense, what the Red Book outlined was neither a building nor a square. It was first and foremost an urban public infrastructure, embodying the result of a conversation between city form and architectural space, and encapsulating the vibrancy of street networks into an open urban void. Going well beyond what could be materialized at the time, the Red Book stands out as a research project that outlines an urban typology yet to be conceived. Its mediators and contributors put together a compelling critique of the role of urban spaces for interaction. By looking at traditional practices in the city, the Red Book recalls the sense of community that Japanese cities are able to accommodate, however, pointing out at the managed control and spatial choreography of such festive activities. However, be aware of that the square, hiroba, or plaza, as exemplified in cities around the world, had lost its original meaning. The research aimed to retrieve the novel function of this urban typology by merging it with the spirit of the festival. Far from being an urban design exercise, the study builds upon artistic references, notation styles, historical accounts, analytical drawings, collages, and photographs to construct an invisible space whose materiality lacks importance. The plural focus of the study somehow represents the vibrancy of Japanese cityscapes, where urban, social, and visual order has been apparently discarded, though a feeling of surveillance seems to be constantly present. Even today, the desire for more public squares in the city seems timely in Japan. Perhaps the closest examples to public bustling squares can be found in the commercial halls of train stations in cities such as Kyoto and Kanazawa, or in shopping malls. Huge roofed spaces with shops, restaurants, and amenities, controlled, surveyed, and covered by spatial structures, these seem to be the festival plazas of the contemporary Japanese city, raising questions around the meaning of public space in Japan. Whether the citizen has the right to freely make use of such open spaces remains, as happened with the Festival Plaza, a contested territory. Thank you.
So what do you see this research leading to? The document's fascinating. What's the next step?
Well, so far I had the opportunity to really go through everything that's said, and also what's depicted in the book. What I find in need of further research is really how the different parties or the different collaborators took part in this work, and whether we are able perhaps to identify who did what, although this may be almost impossible, but at least try to make some assumptions to the and think about the extent to which some of those collaborators actually had a really important impact onto what was then put together in the book, beyond the more well-known authorship, let's say, of Isozaki in particular.
Yes, the authorship's issue is very interesting. Isozaki is always very open about his collaborations, and he doesn't try and take credit for other people's work. And it's always been clear that he worked with software engineers and musicians and various special effects technicians to achieve the Festival Plaza. I've always been curious about who actually was the author of The Big Roof, because it's always credited to Kenzo Tange, but it seems to appear in Isozaki's earliest sketches. Perhaps it's something that they both talked about, and Isozaki obviously put it there in the sketch from the beginning, but perhaps the idea came from Tange. As a public space, I think there's a very interesting idea about a plaza which doesn't have walls but does have a roof. And you could make an analogy with Western and Eastern architecture, in that Western architecture is all about stone walls with small openings, and Eastern architecture is all about big overhanging roofs with lightweight sliding walls that can be removed. So a public space in a European city is surrounded by the stone walls created by the stone walls of the buildings around it. If you wanted to make an analogous space in an Asian situation, you wouldn't have the walls, you'd have the big overhanging roof. So I don't know if that was a conceptual basis for what they did.
Well, not explicitly, as far as I know, they really associate the layout of the plaza to those references being borrowed from Western countries, and they even I was showing one of the pages of the Red Book where they show these typical market square. I think it was from a French city. So I wonder if there is a rather more an association of the plaza as a kind of a big open space, independent from whether it is surrounded by buildings, as you well say is the case of a typical Western plaza, or if it's covered by a roof. I mean, the roof, as it is known, seems to come from Waxman's idea and this very influential workshop that he gave in 1955 in Japan, but also of course the knowledge that they had, that Tange Isazaki and the engineers had of the space frame as becoming the ultimate provider of open spaces without the need of pillars. So I feel like there is a really like a merge of let's say, as you would put it, Eastern and Western ways of conceiving a public space there, and I believe this is something, of course, that deserves perhaps further discussion in that sense as well.
Do we have any questions from the audience, either here in the room with us tonight or online?
Moderator question is for the collection of the idea for the temporality of the plaza. I mean, the events that happen in the plaza, similar to the events that happen in the festival, for example. So is the activity of the people the one that really creates the space? If you know people, the activity, you know about the space. You don't need it because it's not used. Only when there is something that is happening, like a festival or like that. It comes to my mind also the events in Baroque of Rome, the military structures that have been treated on ambassadors and so on, really grateful to see this fostering activity. So it's a little bit similar to the idea that this providing a space. Things can happen, but only when the things happen, the space arises. I think because the people who are moving to the space know about the space. And maybe this can be the traditional Japanese city in a way. I don't
Yeah, I mean, perhaps the difference is that as far as I understand, in Japanese cities, the actual space where the festivals take place, they always remain there because it's the streets themselves, right? So the space is always built, it's always there, but it's a different life, let's say, when festivals where festivals take place, and when they don't, then it's the life is kind of very, very different. And I believe that this is something perhaps different to the way life changes, let's say, in more open plazas. Although, I mean, it's true with constructions, and it comes to my mind the paintings of Gabriele Vela from Venice, and the temporal constructions that say about Baroque, perhaps Baroque temporal constructions, and of Gabriele Vela from Venice, that he depicts as being built there for the festivities that would take place now and then in the piazzas. In a way, I mean, what I find quite interesting is that as it is shown in the Red Book, but then probably materialized also differently, there is this idea that the plaza itself accommodates those different itineraries. So I've shown one of those diagrams, but there are actually 5 or 6 included in the Red Book, all of them proposing, let's say, different itineraries within the plaza. But of course, those would only sort of come to being when people actually move around the space. If not, then the space is simply a void.
I am studying and I have done the research about the I am studying and doing the research about the public station. As far as I know, in Japan, most of the occasions during festivals, the public spaces is actually divided in different areas, such as the concourse of the stations, such as the Kyoto station. You can do the festival things about the food or something like that. And also in another station, it's like a lot of people will gathering around to eat and just enjoy themselves. And most of the time, there's no plaza just built only for the festival. So my question is, would you consider about those
public spaces such as the inside station,
such
or
as the
like
inside the station, or like we are on appearing around on the streets? Would you consider to
use those
to
kind of things?
use those kind of things as your
Yeah, I mean the last point I was trying to make in the presentation was at least trying to to link it to what's happening nowadays in places like the ones you were mentioning.
Or what are the kinds of surveillance and controlling systems that are implemented in those real spaces, similar or in parallel to what we can see in the festival?
What I'm most interested in perhaps is to understand whether there are or that are implemented in those real spaces, similar plaza that was built, that it was certainly a managed plaza. Perhaps it would be interesting to understand how the friction between what you can do and what is actually choreographed, but also what is controlled from this kind of a top-down structure from either the government or institutions or the railways and whoever is involved in those spaces. So.
Just thank you for the lecture today and for sharing your work with us. And I was just thinking, I find it very interesting how this work connects to very different issues that were taking place in Europe and other Western countries during the 1960s. For example, I was thinking about the infinite inhabited infrastructure, spatial infrastructure that Yona Friedman was working with. For example, also the interactive environment feedback between the users and the technology systems and all that that kind of things that Akigram, the group of Akigram, was thinking about also in those years. And even though as you told, as you said, this concept of invisible monuments that links really directly to the anti-monument idea of superstudio. So I think it is fed by all this stuff that was taking place in Western countries those years. What do you think about? Do you think it was such a common, how they share this kind of ideas? Maybe they were meeting each other. I know that Akiram, for example, had some kind of contact with Kenzo Tange in those years, but I'm not really sure of the connection between Yona Friedman and Superstudio and all that people.
Thank you for your question. Yeah, definitely there is this sort of it's in the air, right? The idea of trying to free up the space from constrictions and by means of using structural systems that allow wider spaces to be built. So that's let's say the most obvious sort of common idea that resonates around all the examples that you were mentioning. And in fact, well, the another one that it's worth mentioning is of course Sagittarius Palace, that I've also devoted myself a great deal of time looking at it, and indeed it was very clear in a text mentioning that he was when he realized that Price had already thought about an idea very similar to the Festival Plaza a few years earlier. He kind of he felt a bit flustered, I think, are the real the actual literal words, because that was something that's that had been already thought through, if not built by someone else elsewhere. But what I think is interesting at the same time is that in the Red Book in particular, references that are explicitly referring to current trends are maybe not that much to that of architectural projects that are being made by Western collectives like Archigram and Superstudio and so on, but rather those that are sort of devoting themselves with movable furnitures, with movable pieces, with elements that can be placed in space, in that open space, with a certain freedom. So I think that's kind of interesting. You know, in a way, it feels like it's a given that that these open spaces are, let's say, the solution. But then how you sort of furnish these open spaces is perhaps the question that I believe in the Red Book they try to answer by thinking from those references they adopt from the West of movable furnitures and so on.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Thank you.
Like different kind of factors, like during summer. Now, in all of them, we have a lot of them setting on fireworks, and also like big events such as Halloween, and also sometimes when the baseball is quite very big. And after the baseball or during the baseball, it's kind of effective. So how do you define fasting?
That's a very interesting question, actually. I'm not sure I have an answer. I guess I would have to think about it. And I don't think that's all those different types were actually included in the perhaps reduced idea of a festival by means of, you know, the traditional kind of festival of dancers moving along the streets. So maybe that is also something that relates to how we can see the ideas being portrayed in the Red Book as translated in contemporary events that go beyond what's let's say supposed to be the traditional celebrations that take place in summer. That's definitely a good question that I need to think about. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.